Every morning she tried to seduce him. Though the rancher had only hired her to cook, the wagon lurched to a stop, throwing Emma against the wooden side hard enough to bruise. She steadied herself, her heart hammering as dust settled around the remote ranch house that would become her prison. Her father hadn't even looked at her during the 3-day journey, counting the money he'd received from the rancher over and over like it might multiply in his calloused hands. $200 for his own daughter. The same price he'd paid for his best horse last spring. The rancher stepped out onto the porch, and Emma's stomach dropped. Jake Mitchell was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that seemed to measure everything they touched. He was tall and lean, the kind of man who looked like he'd been carved from the desert itself. Her father climbed down from the wagon, eager to complete the transaction and disappear. Emma sat frozen as they spoke in low voices, her father gesturing toward her like she was livestock. She wanted to run, but where would she go? The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, and she had no money, no horse, nothing but the threadbare dress on her back. Her father had made sure of that, selling everything she owned piece by piece over the past year to feed his gambling addiction. Jake walked toward the wagon, and Emma pressed herself against the far side. She was acutely aware of her size, of how different she looked from the slender women in town who turned men's heads. Her father had reminded her constantly that no man would want her, that she should be grateful anyone was willing to take her at all. But Jake's expression was unreadable as he reached up and offered his hand. She ignored it, climbing down herself with as much dignity as she could muster. Her father was already back on the wagon seat, reins in hand. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even glance back as he urged the horses forward, leaving her standing in a cloud of dust beside a stranger who now owned her like property. The silence stretched between them as the wagon disappeared over the horizon. Emma's hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists, refusing to let this man see her cry. She'd shed enough tears over the past week, locked in her room while her father finalized the arrangement. Now she needed to survive whatever came next. Jake finally spoke, his voice rough from disuse. "You hungry?" The question caught her off guard. She was starving, actually. Her father had barely fed her during the journey, as if she weren't worth the expensive food anymore. But she wasn't about to admit weakness to this stranger. She shook her head. "You're lying," he said flatly, turning toward the house. "Come inside." Emma hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to refuse, to fight, to do something other than meekly follow. But what choice did she have? She was miles from anywhere, with no resources and no allies. Slowly, she followed him up the porch steps and through the doorway into a surprisingly clean interior. The house was simple but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy wooden table, and windows that let in the harsh afternoon light. Jake moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out bread, cheese, and dried meat. He set it on the table without ceremony. "Eat," he commanded, then walked to a trunk in the corner and began rummaging through it. Emma approached the table cautiously, watching him from the corner of her eye. She grabbed a piece of bread and ate it quickly, then another, unable to stop herself once she started. She was chewing her third piece when Jake returned and dropped something on the table beside her. Papers. Legal documents. She stopped mid-bite, staring at them. "Read them," Jake said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. Emma's hands shook as she picked up the first page. It was a contract, but not the kind she'd feared. Her eyes scanned the words, confusion mounting with each line. This wasn't a marriage certificate or a deed of ownership. It was something else entirely, something that made no sense at all. "I don't understand," she whispered. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her with those measuring eyes. "Your father sold you to me." "That's true. But what he doesn't know is what I actually bought you for. And trust me, girl, it's not what you think." Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as she looked up at him, the paper still clutched in her trembling hands. Whatever she'd expected, this wasn't it. And from the determined set of Jake's jaw, she was about to discover that her nightmare was only beginning, just not in the way she'd imagined. The contract in Emma's hands made her head spin. According to the document, she wasn't being kept as a wife or a servant. Jake Mitchell had purchased her freedom with the specific purpose of employing her in what the papers called specialized desert reconnaissance and recovery operations. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Dangerous terrain, high-value targets, discretionary compensation upon successful completion. This wasn't domestic servitude, this was something far stranger. "You still don't get it," Jake said, standing and moving to a locked cabinet on the far wall. He produced a key from his pocket and opened it, revealing an arsenal that made Emma's breath catch. Rifles, pistols, knives, and equipment she couldn't even name. "I'm a bounty hunter." one of the best in 3 territories. And I didn't buy you to cook or clean or any of that nonsense your father probably told you to expect. Emma set down the papers, her mind racing. Then why? Jake pulled out a worn leather journal and tossed it onto the table. It fell open to pages covered in sketches and notes. 6 months ago, a gang hit the bank in Silver Creek. They got away with $30,000 and killed 2 people in the process. The law's been chasing them ever since, but these aren't ordinary outlaws. They're smart, organized, and they've got a network of hideouts across the desert that nobody's been able to map. He flipped through pages showing rough drawings of men's faces, locations marked with X's, and detailed notes about movements and patterns. Emma leaned closer despite herself, drawn into the information laid out before her. The gang's leader is a man named Dutch Crenshaw, Jake continued. He's careful, paranoid. He doesn't trust anyone, especially not men who might be bounty hunters or lawmen. But he's got a weakness. Jake tapped one of the sketches. He's got a sister. Overweight woman, dark hair, keeps to herself. Lives in a settlement 2 days north of here. Emma's stomach turned as understanding began to dawn. She looked down at herself, then back at Jake. You want me to pretend to be her? Not pretend, Jake corrected. Dutch hasn't seen his sister in 5 years. They communicate through letters, but she never leaves her town, and he never visits. Too dangerous for both of them. According to my sources, she's been sick lately. Real sick. Dutch has been trying to convince her to come stay with him and his crew until she recovers, somewhere he can protect her. Emma pushed away from the table, anger finally overcoming her fear. So you bought me to use as bait? To trick a killer into thinking I'm his sister so you can collect a bounty? $30,000 bounty, Jake said calmly. Split 50-50 between us. That's $15,000, Emma. Enough to start over anywhere you want. Enough to make sure no man ever owns you again. The number hit her like a physical blow. $15,000. She'd never imagined having that kind of money. Her father had sold her for $200, a fraction of what she could earn if she survived this insane plan. But the risk was staggering. And if they figure out I'm not her? Emma demanded. If Dutch realizes you tricked him? Jake's expression hardened. Then we fight our way out. I won't lie to you about the danger. This is the most dangerous job I've ever planned. But it's also the biggest score, and you're the only person who can make it work. Emma's mind whirled. This was madness. Absolute madness. But what was her alternative? Stay here as Jake's property? Try to run into the desert with nothing? At least this way she had a chance at real freedom, real money, a real future. Why should I trust you? She asked quietly. Why should I believe you'll actually give me half? Jake moved to the fireplace and pulled down a small metal box from the mantel. He opened it and removed a thick stack of bills, counting out $200. He walked back and placed it in front of Emma. That's what your father got for you. It's yours now. Consider it a signing bonus. When we complete the job, you get your half of the bounty before I collect mine. That's in the contract, too, if you'd kept reading. He paused, his gaze steady. I need you alive and motivated, Emma. A partner, not a slave. I can't pull this off without someone I can actually trust to play the part. Emma stared at the money, more cash than she'd ever held in her life. Slowly she reached out and touched it, half expecting it to disappear like a mirage. But it was real. Solid. Hers. How long do I have to decide? She asked. About 5 seconds, Jake replied, moving back to his weapons cabinet. Dutch's crew is moving again. I got word this morning that they're heading toward the Red Rock territory. If we're going to intercept them and set this up, we need to leave within the hour. Emma's heart raced. Everything was moving too fast. Yesterday she'd been locked in her father's house, resigned to whatever horror awaited her. Today she was being offered a fortune and a chance at revenge against the father who'd sold her, but only if she was willing to walk into the den of murderous outlaws and pretend to be one of their own. She looked at Jake, really looked at him. He was preparing his weapons with practiced efficiency, checking ammunition and sharpening blades. This was a man who lived on the edge of death, who made his living hunting the most dangerous people in the West, and he wanted her as a partner. Emma picked up the $200 and folded it carefully, tucking it into her dress. Then she picked up the contract and read through it properly this time. The terms were clear, 50-50 split. Her freedom guaranteed in writing. Jake Mitchell's signature at the bottom, witnessed and dated. I need a gun, she said finally. If I'm doing this, I need to know how to defend myself. Jake looked up from his preparations. and for the first time Emma saw something like approval in his eyes. "Smart girl. We've got a long ride ahead. I'll teach you everything you need to know. But first, you need different clothes." Dutch's sister wouldn't wear rags. He moved to a chest and pulled out riding clothes, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. "These belong to a woman I used to ride with. She was about your size. Get changed. We leave in 30 minutes. As Emma took the clothes, Jake added quietly, "One more thing. Once we're out there, you follow my lead. No matter what happens, no matter what you see, you trust me, and you do exactly what I say. Lives depend on it. Yours, mine, and potentially a lot of others." "Can you do that?" Emma met his gaze and nodded. She was terrified, but beneath the fear was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. For the first time in her life, she wasn't helpless. She wasn't powerless. She was about to become someone new, someone dangerous, someone free. 30 minutes, she agreed, and headed toward the back room to change, the weight of the $200 pressed against her heart like a promise. The desert stretched endlessly before them, harsh and unforgiving under the relentless sun. Emma had been riding for 6 hours straight, her thighs burning and her back aching from the unfamiliar saddle. But she didn't complain. Jake had given her the gentler of his 2 horses, a steady mare named Duchess, and had spent the first 2 hours of their journey teaching her the basics of shooting while they rode. Her first few attempts with the revolver had been disasters. The recoil shocked her, sending shots wild. But Jake was patient, adjusting her grip, showing her how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she'd managed to hit a cactus from 20 feet away. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "Tell me about Dutch's sister," Emma said as they paused to water the horses at a small creek. "Everything you know." Jake pulled out his journal and opened it to a page filled with notes. "Her name's Margaret Crenshaw, 24 years old. She works as a seamstress in a town called Willow Springs. Never married. Keeps to herself mostly, but she's known for being kind to kids and stray animals. People who know her say she's quiet but has a sharp mind." Emma absorbed the information, trying to become Margaret in her mind. "What kind of sickness does she have?" "Consumption," Jake replied. "At least that's what Dutch thinks. She's been writing him letters about coughing fits and weakness. Could be real, could be something else. Either way, Dutch is worried enough that he's willing to risk bringing her to one of his hideouts." "And you're sure he'll believe I'm her?" Jake studied Emma's face carefully. "You've got the right build, right hair color. Dutch hasn't seen her in 5 years, and people change. The key is in the details. Margaret has a birthmark on her left wrist shaped like a crescent moon. I had a woman in town paint one on you while you were changing. It'll last a couple weeks if you're careful." Emma looked down at her wrist, noting the realistic-looking mark she'd barely noticed before. Jake's attention to detail was both impressive and terrifying. He'd thought of everything. What about her voice, her mannerisms? "That's where you have to trust your instincts," Jake said, closing the journal. "Margaret's been sick, remember? People's voices change when they're ill."
"They move differently."
"You're not trying to be her exact. You're trying to be a version of her that Dutch will accept because he wants to believe it's really her." They rode on as darkness fell, Jake navigating by stars and landmarks Emma couldn't see. He'd obviously traveled this route before, knew every rock and ravine. Finally, when Emma thought she might fall from her saddle from exhaustion, Jake pulled up beside a cluster of boulders. "We camp here tonight. No fire. Dutch has scouts everywhere, and we're getting close to territory he controls." Emma slid from her horse, her legs nearly buckling. Jake caught her arm, steadying her. "You did good today. Better than I expected." The praise warmed her more than she wanted to admit. She helped Jake unsaddle the horses and set up their simple camp. He handed her dried meat and hardtack, which she ate mechanically, too tired to taste it. "Tomorrow gets harder," Jake said quietly, staring out at the dark desert. "We'll reach the settlement where Margaret lives. I've got a contact there who'll help us stage your departure. We need to make it look real, like Margaret finally agreed to visit her brother. If anyone in that town suspects something's wrong, word will reach Dutch before we do."
Emma wrapped herself in the blanket Jake had given her.
"What if someone there knows Margaret well enough to realize I'm not her?" "That's the risk," Jake admitted. "But Margaret keeps to herself. My contact says she rarely talks to anyone beyond basic pleasantries. Most people in town know of her, but don't really know her." That's our advantage. Sleep was slow to come despite Emma's exhaustion. Every sound in the desert made her jump. Rattlesnakes, coyotes, the wind through the rocks. All of it felt threatening in the darkness. But eventually, fatigue won, and she drifted off with one hand on the revolver Jake had insisted she keep beside her. She woke to Jake shaking her shoulder, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. They ate quickly and saddled up, riding hard as the sun rose. The landscape gradually changed, becoming slightly less barren. Small shrubs appeared, then actual trees. By midday, they could see the settlement of Willow Springs in the distance. Jake pulled up on a ridge overlooking the town. That's Margaret's house, the one with the blue door on the east side. He pointed to a small cabin set apart from the main cluster of buildings. My contact, a woman named Betty, runs the general store. She's expecting us. She'll spread word that Margaret's brothers sent an escort to bring her south for her health. And people will believe that? Emma asked skeptically. They'll believe what they want to believe, Jake replied. Folks in small towns love a story. A sick woman reuniting with her outlaw brother? That's the kind of tale that'll have everyone talking by sunset. The more they talk, the more real it becomes. They descended toward the town, and Emma's heart hammered with each step Duchess took. This was it, the moment where she stopped being Emma and became Margaret Crenshaw. One mistake, one wrong word, and everything could fall apart. Betty turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a knowing smile. She greeted Jake like an old friend, then turned her attention to Emma. So you're the one playing Margaret. Bold choice, Jake. Very bold. Can you make it work? Jake asked. Betty circled Emma, studying her from every angle. Clothes are right. Face could pass. But she moves wrong. Too defensive, too scared. Margaret's sick, not terrified. She snapped her fingers in front of Emma's face, making her flinch. See? That. Stop doing that. For the next hour, Betty worked with Emma, teaching her to move with the slow deliberateness of someone conserving energy, someone fighting an illness. How to let her shoulders sag just slightly. How to pause before speaking as if gathering strength. Small details that would sell the illusion. Better, Betty finally said. Not perfect, but better. Now for the hard part. She led them to Margaret's cabin and produced a key. I've been collecting Margaret's mail for the past month, telling people she's too sick for visitors. That's bought you some time, but you'll need to be seen leaving. People need to witness Margaret Crenshaw, getting on a horse and riding south. Inside the cabin, Emma felt like she was invading someone's private life. Personal belongings, half-finished sewing projects, letters from Dutch carefully stored in a wooden box. Betty handed Emma one of Margaret's dresses. Wear this. Take a few personal items, things Margaret would bring with her. Letters from Dutch, her mother's locket, that kind of thing. Make it real. Emma changed into Margaret's dress, feeling the weight of the deception settle over her like a physical thing. When she looked in the cracked mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked older somehow, more substantial. One more thing, Betty said, handing Emma a small vial. Consumption patients cough blood sometimes. If anyone questions you, put a drop of this on your handkerchief and cough into it. Don't overdo it, just enough to make them uncomfortable so they stop asking questions. Jake stepped outside to prepare the horses while Betty coached Emma through a final round of practice. How Margaret would greet people she knew, how she'd thank them for their concern, how she'd explain her decision to finally visit Dutch despite the danger. You've got this, Betty said quietly. I can see it in your eyes. You're stronger than you think. When Emma emerged from the cabin, several townspeople had gathered, drawn by curiosity. Betty had done her job well, spreading word of Margaret's imminent departure. Emma's hands wanted to shake, but she forced them still, channeling Margaret's quiet dignity. An elderly woman approached, her face kind. Margaret, dear, are you sure about this? Traveling in your condition? Emma let herself cough softly into her hand, then smiled weakly. My brother needs me, Mrs. Patterson, and I need family right now. I'll be safer with Dutch than I am here alone. The lie came easier than she'd expected, Mrs. Adam. Patterson patted her hand sympathetically, and Emma saw tears in the woman's eyes. Real concern for someone who didn't exist, at least not in the form standing before her. Jake helped Emma onto Duchess, maintaining the fiction of being a hired escort. We should go, Miss Crenshaw. Long ride ahead. As they rode out of Willow Springs, Emma felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on her back. People waving goodbye, wishing Margaret well, some dabbing at tears. She was taking something from them, she realized. Their concern for a neighbor, their genuine kindness. It made her feel dirty in a way her father's betrayal never had. Once they were beyond sight of the town, Jake finally spoke. You did well. Better than well. You were convincing. Emma didn't feel proud. She felt sick. Those people really cared about her. About Margaret. They did, Jake acknowledged. And when this is over, Margaret will get word that her brother was captured and that she's safe to return. Betty will make sure of that. But right now, we have a job to finish. They rode hard into the afternoon, the landscape growing rougher and more desolate. Jake became increasingly alert, his hand never far from his rifle. They were entering Dutch's territory now, and every ridge could hide a lookout. As the sun began to set, a shot rang out across the desert. Both horses shied, and Emma nearly fell before regaining her seat. Jake's hand was already on his weapon, but he didn't draw. 3 riders emerged from behind a rocky outcrop, rifles trained on them. The man in the center was massive, with a scarred face and dead eyes. He looked at Jake with obvious suspicion, then his gaze landed on Emma.
"Who's the woman?" the man demanded.
"Margaret Crenshaw. I'm escorting her to her brother." The scarred man rode closer, studying Emma with unnerving intensity. She forced herself to meet his eyes to show Margaret's quiet strength rather than Emma's terror. After what felt like an eternity, he grunted. "Dutch'll want to see her. Follow us. Try anything stupid and I'll put a bullet in both your heads." As they followed the 3 outlaws deeper into the Badlands, Emma realized there was no turning back now. They were in Dutch Crenshaw's world, surrounded by his men riding toward a confrontation that could end in fortune or death. The hideout was carved into the side of a canyon, invisible until you were almost on top of it. Natural caves had been expanded and fortified, creating a fortress that could house 20 men easily. Campfires dotted the area, and Emma counted at least 15 outlaws moving between the caves and rough shelters, every one of them armed, every one of them dangerous. The scarred man who'd intercepted them, who Jake whispered was named Cole, led them to the largest cave entrance. "Wait here," he ordered, disappearing inside. Emma's mouth was dry. Her hands trembled on Dutch's reins, and she couldn't stop them. Jake caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Trust me," the gesture said, but Emma wasn't sure trust was enough anymore. Dutch Crenshaw emerged from the cave, and Emma's breath caught. He wasn't what she'd expected. The sketches in Jake's journal had shown a hard man, all sharp angles and cruel lines, but the man before her looked almost ordinary. Medium height, medium build, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his reputation. Until he moved, and Emma saw the predatory grace in every step. This was a man who'd killed without hesitation and would do so again. His gaze locked onto Emma, and she saw something shift in his expression. Doubt, hope, suspicion. All of it cycling across his features in rapid succession. "Maggie?" His voice cracked on the name. "Is that really you?" Emma slid from her horse, letting her exhaustion show. It wasn't hard. 3 days of riding had left her genuinely depleted. "Hello, Dutch. It's been a long time." She'd practiced Margaret's voice with Betty, making it softer and raspier than her own, adding the breathlessness of someone struggling with consumption. Dutch took a step closer, and Emma saw tears forming in his eyes. "My God, Maggie, you look so sick. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" "I didn't want to worry you," Emma replied, lowering her gaze the way Margaret might. Modest, unassuming. "But I'm scared, Dutch. The doctor in Willow Springs says I don't have much time. I wanted to see you before..." She let the sentence trail off, coughing into her handkerchief. She'd palmed the vial Betty had given her, and a drop of the blood-red liquid stained the white cloth. Dutch saw it and went pale. No, you're going to be fine. I'll get you the best doctors, the best medicine, whatever you need, Maggie." He turned to his men. "Someone get my sister water. Food. Make up a bed in my quarters. Now." The outlaws scattered to obey, and Dutch gently took Emma's arm, guiding her toward the cave. Jake moved to follow, but Cole blocked his path. "The escort can sleep with the horses?" Cole said flatly. Jake looked at Dutch, who nodded. "Your job's done. I'll pay you in the morning. My sister's safe with family now." Emma's heart raced as she realized they were being separated. This wasn't part of the plan. Jake was supposed to stay close, to be there if something went wrong. But she couldn't protest without breaking character. She let Dutch lead her away, catching one last glimpse of Jake's face. He looked worried but gave her another small nod. Dutch's quarters were surprisingly comfortable. A real bed, clean blankets, even a small table with a kerosene lamp. He fussed over Emma, bringing her water and food himself rather than trusting the men outside. "I can't believe you're really here," he kept saying. "All these years, I wanted to bring you to me, but I knew it was too dangerous. And now you're sick, and it's my fault. If I hadn't chosen this life, you could have gotten proper care." Emma saw genuine pain in his eyes, and it made her roll even harder. This wasn't a monster. This was a man who'd made terrible choices but still loved his sister, still felt guilt and responsibility. "It's not your fault," she said softly, playing Margaret's forgiveness. "We all make our choices. You did what you had to do." Dutch sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly. "I've killed people, Maggie. Done things I can't take back. But I never stopped thinking about you. About keeping you safe. That's why I keep doing this. One more score, one more bank, and I'd have enough to retire. Enough to get us both somewhere safe." Emma's chest tightened. In another life, this conversation might have been real. A brother and sister reunited, trying to find redemption. But it was all built on lies, and she was the instrument of those lies. "Tell me about your life," Dutch said. "Your letters were always so brief. What's Willow Springs really like? Are people kind to you there?" This was the danger. Details that Emma didn't know, couldn't know. She relied on what Betty had told her and what she'd seen in the cabin. It's quiet, simple. "Mrs. Patterson checks on me sometimes. I do sewing work when I'm strong enough. It's a lonely life, but it's mine." Dutch nodded, seeming to accept this. "Do you ever think about Mother? About the farm before Father died?" Emma's mind raced. Jake's notes had mentioned the Crenshaw parents were both dead, but no details about how or when. She took a gamble. "Sometimes, but those memories hurt too much. I prefer to think about the future, even if I don't have much of one left." The morbid turn seemed to satisfy Dutch. He squeezed her hand. "Don't talk like that. You're going to get better. I promise you that." A commotion outside interrupted them. Raised voices, then gunfire. Dutch was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. "Stay here," he ordered Emma, then rushed out. Emma's pulse hammered. Had something happened to Jake? Had their cover been blown? She moved to the cave entrance, peering out carefully. The camp was in chaos. Men running toward the canyon entrance, weapons drawn. More gunfire echoed off the stone walls. Emma couldn't see what was happening, but she heard Cole's voice bellowing orders. Then she saw Jake. He was fighting 3 men at once, his movements precise and deadly. He'd already dropped 2 outlaws, and he was reaching for another weapon when Cole appeared behind him with a rifle. Emma didn't think. She grabbed the pistol Dutch had left on his table and ran out of the cave. "Dutch!" she screamed. "They're attacking your men!" Her voice carried across the camp and heads turned, including Cole's. That single moment of distraction was all Jake needed. He spun and disarmed Cole, then used the man as a shield as more outlaws converged.
But they were outnumbered.
Emma could see that clearly. Jake had fought brilliantly, but there were too many of them. He was going to die unless something changed. Dutch emerged from the chaos, his face twisted with fury. "Who are you?" he demanded, looking at Jake. "Who sent you?" "I'm a friend of Margaret's," Jake called back, still holding Cole hostage, "just trying to make sure she got here safely." "By attacking my men?" Dutch's hand was on his pistol, and Emma saw him about to draw. "Stop!" Emma shouted, stepping between them. She was still holding the pistol, and she raised it, pointing it at Dutch. Her hand shook violently, and she saw his expression shift from anger to shock to heartbreak. "Maggie, what are you doing?" "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, and she meant it. "I'm so sorry, Dutch. But I'm not your sister." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dutch's face went white, then red with rage. Every outlaw in the camp turned their weapons toward Emma and Jake. They were trapped, surrounded, and about to die. But Emma noticed something Dutch didn't. Jake had positioned himself near the canyon's powder storage, the explosives the gang used for bank jobs. His hand was on a match, and his eyes were locked on Emma's. "When I say run," he mouthed silently. "You run and don't look back." The world seemed to slow down as Emma understood what was about to happen. The magnitude of the violence. The cost of their greed. She'd come here for money and freedom, but she was about to pay a price she'd never anticipated. Dutch raised his pistol, pointing it at Emma's heart. "Who are you?" Emma met his eyes one last time. Someone who needed to be free. Jake struck the match. "Run!" Emma ran. The explosion turned night into day, a massive fireball erupting from the powder storage. The blast wave threw Emma forward, and she hit the ground hard, her ears ringing. Behind her, screams and chaos. The sound of rocks falling, of men shouting in pain and confusion. She scrambled to her feet, disoriented. Smoke and dust filled the canyon, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "Jake!" she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the cacophony. A hand grabbed her arm, and she nearly shot whoever it was before recognizing Jake's face through the haze. His left sleeve was on fire, and she beat at it with her bare hands until the flames went out. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, and his eyes were wild. "The horses!" he shouted. "We have to get to the horses." They ran through the chaos, ducking flying debris and stumbling over bodies. Emma tried not to look too closely at the carnage Jake's explosion had caused. Some of Dutch's men were dead, others were wounded, crawling toward safety. The hideout was collapsing, centuries-old stone giving way to the modern violence of dynamite. Duchess and Jake's horse were where they'd left them, terrified but alive. Jake practically threw Emma onto Duchess's back, then mounted his own horse. They took off at a full gallop, racing away from the dying canyon as more explosions echoed behind them. The gang's entire ammunition supply was going up. They rode for hours without stopping, not speaking, just focused on putting distance between themselves and what they'd done. Emma's mind kept replaying the look on Dutch's face when she'd told him the truth, the betrayal, the hurt beneath the rage. She destroyed him not with violence but with deception, and somehow that felt worse. Dawn was breaking when Jake finally pulled up beside a small water source. Both horses were lathered and trembling. Jake slid from his saddle and immediately collapsed. Emma rushed to him, seeing that his injuries were worse than she'd thought. Burns covered his left arm and the head wound was still bleeding. "We need to bandage these," she said, her hands shaking as she tore strips from her dress. Jake let her work, his face gray with pain. "Did we get him?" he asked quietly. "Did you see if Dutch survived?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know." There was so much smoke and confusion. Half that canyon collapsed. "If he survived, he'll come after us," Jake said. "He'll hunt us to the ends of the earth for what we did." "What I did," Emma corrected. "I'm the one who lied to him. I'm the one who made him believe. You did what you had to do, what we both had to do." Jake winced as Emma tied off the bandage on his arm. "The money's gone now, Emma. Burned up in that explosion. There's no bounty without proof Dutch is dead, and we can't go back there to confirm." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. They'd risked everything, done terrible things, and they had nothing to show for it. The $200 Jake had given her was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos. She was back where she'd started. No money, no prospects, nothing but a horse and the blood on her hands. "So what do we do now?" she asked. Jake looked at her, and despite his pain, she saw something like respect in his eyes. "We survive. We keep moving. And maybe we find another way." They rested for 2 hours, then rode on. Jake's injuries slowed them down, and Emma took over navigation, using the sun and the landmarks Jake had taught her about. They were heading toward a town called Copper Ridge, 3 days south. Jake had contacts there who might help them. The journey was brutal. Jake's wounds got infected, and by the second day he was feverish and delirious. Emma did her best to care for him, changing his bandages and forcing water down his throat, but she was terrified he was going to die, and if he did, she'd be alone in the middle of nowhere with no idea how to survive. On the third afternoon, as Emma was beginning to lose hope, they spotted Copper Ridge in the distance. It was larger than Willow Springs, with actual streets and multi-story buildings. Emma guided Duchess toward the town, Jake barely conscious in his saddle. She didn't notice the riders until they were surrounding her. 5 men, all armed, all wearing badges. Emma's heart sank. They'd been caught. The lead marshal was an older man with steel-gray hair and hard eyes. He looked at Jake's injuries, then at Emma, and his expression was unreadable. "You're Jake Mitchell," he said. "Bounty hunter. We got word about what happened at Dutch Crenshaw's hideout. Whole damn canyon collapsed. They're still digging out bodies." "We didn't mean for it to go that far," Emma started, but the marshal held up a hand. 23 men died in that explosion. Dutch Crenshaw among them. They found his body this morning, crushed by falling rocks. Now, normally that'd be something to celebrate. Dutch was wanted in 5 territories. But the problem is, you two aren't authorized bounty hunters. You're vigilantes. And vigilantes are just killers by another name. Emma felt the world tilting. They were going to be arrested, tried for murder. Everything they'd done, all the pain and death, and it would end with them in prison or on a gallows. But the marshal wasn't finished. However, the families of the people Dutch killed are grateful. The banks he robbed are grateful. Hell, most of the territory is grateful. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take this reward money, $5,000 for Dutch's confirmed death, and you're going to disappear. Change your names. Start over somewhere else. And you're never going to pull something like this again. Because next time, there won't be any mercy. Understood? He held out a bank draft, and Emma took it with trembling hands. $5,000. Not the fortune they'd hoped for, but enough. Enough to start over. Enough to be free. There's a doctor 2 streets down, the marshal continued. Get your partner patched up proper. Then get out of my territory. I don't want to see either of your faces ever again. The lawman rode away, leaving Emma stunned, and Jake barely conscious. She got them to the doctor, who took one look at Jake's wounds and whistled low. You're lucky to be alive, the doctor said, beginning to clean the infected burns. Another day, and you'd have lost this arm. Emma waited outside while the doctor worked, clutching the bank draft like a lifeline. When Jake finally emerged, his arm properly bandaged and his fever broken, he looked 10 years older. How much? He asked. 5,000. Jake nodded slowly. Split? Emma thought about everything they'd been through. The lies, the violence, the deaths of 23 men, however guilty they might have been. She thought about Dutch's face when she'd told him the truth and the weight of that betrayal. Split, she agreed. 2,500 each. They found a bank and cashed the draft, then stood in the street with their shares of money and no idea what came next. Jake looked at Emma, and she saw the question in his eyes before he asked it. What are you going to do now? Emma looked down at the money in her hands. $2,500. More than her father had ever made in his life. More than she'd ever dreamed of having. Freedom purchased with blood and lies. I'm going to buy a dress shop, she said quietly. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere no one knows my name or my face. I'm going to learn to sew properly, and I'm going to make beautiful things instead of destroying them. Jake smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. That sounds good. That sounds right. What about you? I'm done bounty hunting, Jake said. Done with killing. Maybe I'll buy some land. Try ranching for real instead of just pretending to be a rancher.
He paused. You could come with...
As a partner, not like before. Building something honest. Emma considered the offer. Part of her wanted to say yes, to stay with the only person who understood what she'd been through. But another part knew she needed to be alone, to figure out who Emma was when she wasn't being sold or used or turned into someone else. I need to do this on my own, she said gently. But maybe someday, if you're still ranching and I'm still sewing, we'll find each other again. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. They shook hands like the partners they'd briefly been, then walked in opposite directions. Emma didn't look back. She bought a ticket on the next stage heading west, toward California and the coast. As the stage pulled away from Copper Ridge, Emma watched the desert landscape roll by and thought about the girl who'd been sold by her father just weeks ago. That girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd seen the depths of human cruelty and her own capacity for deception. She thought about Margaret Crenshaw, the real woman whose identity she'd stolen. Betty had promised to tell Margaret the truth, to warn her that her brother was dead and that she was safe. Emma hoped that was enough. Hoped that somehow Margaret could forgive what had been done in her name. The money felt heavy in Emma's bag. Blood money. Freedom money. The cost of her new life measured in 23 bodies and one brother's broken trust. She knew she'd never forget Dutch's face, never stop wondering if there had been another way. But regret was a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd made her choices. Now she had to live with them. As the stage carried her toward an uncertain future, Emma pressed her hand against the window and watched the sun set over the desert. Somewhere out there, Jake was beginning his own journey. Somewhere out there, Margaret Crenshaw was learning that her brother was dead. And somewhere deep inside Emma's chest, beneath the scars and the pain, a small spark of hope still burned. She was free. She was alive, and she was finally, truly her own person. Whatever came next, whatever she'd built with the blood-stained money in her bag, it would be hers, not her father's, not Jake's, not a lie borrowed from someone else's life, just Emma's. And that, she decided, would have to be enough.